Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality. I'm your host, Doc Bach, here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we are continuing our series on antisocial personality disorder. Not all antisocial personalities are criminal, and thus narcissists and antisocials can often show up in the same places of power and prominence, but for different reasons. So we're going to unpack those reasons and how these personalities are both similar and different. Let's jump in. So let's first start with some definitions. So narcissism isn't just part of narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissism is also a trait. I like to think of narcissism like salt in a recipe. So at normal levels, it's fine. Great even. It brings out the other personality flavors and contributes to assertiveness, confidence, leadership, and taking calculated risks. However, if there's too much narcissism in the personality profile, it's like too much salt in a recipe. Have you ever taken a big gulp of salty seawater? Pretty gross, right? Like it's too much and makes for a really unpleasant experience.
Right. And narcissism as a trait exists on a continuum ranging from normal to pathological to malignant narcissism. And various personalities can have traits of pathological narcissism or elements of malignant narcissism, each giving slightly different flavor to the overall personality profile. Now, obviously, malignant narcissism is the darkest type of narcissism, but any pathological narcissism is going to be problematic.
Absolutely. And all dysfunctional and disordered personalities have a heaping dose of pathological narcissism as the first ingredient. Sometimes it's even the first thing that you kind of taste when dealing with someone who has a personality disorder. But some of the darkest personality disorders like antisocial, paranoid, sadistic, and psychopathic are more likely to have malignant narcissism. So there can be a lot of overlap with these types, which can make it very, very confusing.
And then in a similar but different vein, antisocial isn't only a personality disorder. Right. It can simply just be antisocial behaviors or behaviors that move against society and norms. Neither is necessarily diagnostic. And this can be a bit tricky to understand. So we thought we'd use our own antisocial behaviors and traits as examples.
Exactly. Well, especially because as the therapists, in order to treat antisocials, we have to get in touch with our own antisocialness, which is very uncomfortable for most people. So we're leaning into that discomfort. But I'm going to start with you, Doc Fish. I'm going to start with my psychoanalysis of you because I know I have seen some antisocial traits in you. There is an angsty teenage turtle living under that schizoid shell. And I think you are living a countercultural lifestyle, living in more of a podunk, remote area of the world in your bunker, researching the dark things of life.
I do enjoy darkness, and I do think humanity is weird. Like rules and some laws are weird. Like, why is there a social script of, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good. How are you? Good. I don't want to talk to you if I'm at the grocery store. I have RBF. I purposely don't make eye contact. I don't care if I look like a bum in my sweats. Like, I question stuff that people aren't comfortable questioning.
I love that. Yeah.
And then I am a nice little turtle until there's something to protect that I really do care about. So then I do have a backbone and I will fight you on something I'm passionate about or if I'm holding boundaries. And I'm also pretty non-reactive. So all of that can look antisocial on the outside, but not the inside.
Yeah. So you're countercultural in the way that you live your life, not only physically, but in how you navigate the social world. You really don't care about the pleasantries or being social. Like you have more important stuff to do, like researching the darkness for this episode.
Absolutely. Yes. And the aloofness. So I don't actually have enough energy to be antisocial though. Like I couldn't care less about power. Right. I detach. I don't dominate. Sometimes I try to match the energy of antisocials in my life, which I can now do for approximately 3 minutes, which is an increase from 2 years ago when it was only 1 minute.
Oh, you're timing yourself.
I'm trying.
That's really funny. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So you have overlap in the angst, the aloofness, the detached and coldness that you display socially. But if I know you right, you're also not going to run for office and start an antisocial revolution because you don't have the energy for it.
No, I don't even have energy for my dishes.
I don't either. And I don't know what my excuse is.
Dishes are evil. So I have seen some evidence of antisocialness in you, Doc Bach, and I'm thinking about your reaction to being put in a box. You want to expand on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I am a rule follower to a T. I am compliant. There is a strong compulsiveness to my personality. I want to please. But if you start boxing me in or micromanaging me or asserting some type of control or dominance, I will rebel. I do have the energy to start an uprising or a revolution if things get really crazy. But let me be honest, they have to get really, really crazy for me to do that. But two major examples of that would be getting boxed in into like a 1950s gender role or like extreme rigidity from like a religious institution.
Mm-hmm. But even though you're a rule follower, you can get pretty creative with finding loopholes and not actually doing what all the other little sheepies are doing.
Yeah. So even being a rule follower, I like to carve my own path in a way that's still above board and compliant, but I am not a herd follower. I'm a creative type and an entrepreneur, so I naturally think outside the box, and I really don't like to have bounds put on my creativity. So in graduate school, I'll give you an example of this. So we have to do an internship year for our doctorate. For our final year, the school made it seem like the only way to do an internship was through the match process, which I get. The match process is very important for most people, and it kind of mirrors the medical model where MDs also go through their match process too. But they put your name in a lottery, it spits out where you go across the nation, basically. Very simplistic way of describing it, but that's what it is. And that just wasn't going to work for me in my career path. I didn't want to do it. I had a career path lined up with the FBI through an extracurricular project. I was either going to take that path or I had relationships with people in private practice in the community. And it was here in Virginia Beach. And I wasn't about to just uproot my whole life because they told me that I needed to. So I read the handbook, found a loophole, designed my own internship locally. Everything was above board, as it should be in the handbook, that they never talked about that there were other options for people like me. Put it in front of the director's nose and was like, I need you to approve this.
Which makes you not a true antisocial on the inside, but you can have that antisocial flavor in your like challenge energy. And I just bet they love that.
They sure did love that. But yes, my compulsive flavor does contain the antisocial angst that I have going on underneath too. But yeah, I will not be boxed in or told what to do because everyone else is doing it.
And it's not pathological.
Yeah.
So antisocial can be a flavor, a trait, or a whole big personality.
Very much so. Yeah. And if we look closely, like we all have a pop of antisocial color inside of us. Like we can all go through an antisocial stage in development too, right?
Yes. So antisocial dynamics are actually really appropriate during early childhood with a focus on a couple things. Primary narcissism. So that's where infants find pleasure in like all the things, all the sensory stuff, eating, touching, smelling, pooping. It is a very self-focused world.
It is. Yeah.
Another one is omnipotent control. So that's where infants specifically don't understand that their needs are separate from mom's needs. So like, I want the milk, I shall have the milk, and I am the ruler of this world because I get the milk. And then another one is acting out, where similarly kiddos act out their emotions instead of communicating them. So anger equals throwing something, not saying like, I'm angry, mama.
Yeah, so these antisocial dynamics can be normal and a healthy part of super early childhood development. But if the child gets stuck there and then grows into an adult, that's often where we start to see problems, because that stuck point is where I'd guess we'd see more of the pathological antisocial behaviors and traits showing up.
Exactly. It's cute and acceptable for a kiddo, but it's inconsiderate and potentially harmful as an adult.
Absolutely. Let's also mention here, though, the narcissism dynamics, which are also appropriate during early childhood to create a positive self-image.
So in infancy, narcissism is inherent, right? Infants view mom as themselves. Like, I am mom, mom is me, and that's healthy. It's necessary. An infant is dependent on that for healthy development. And then young kiddos should develop positive self-talk to build their self-esteem and security. And it's humorously narcissistic. It's like, I have the bestest great idea, right? And then egocentrism in about 3 years old, they like to just stand in front of your face and assume that you can see what they see because their world is your world. Their perspective is obviously your perspective.
Right. Those are great examples. Yeah. And there's also teenage egocentrism, where they think that everyone is watching them. It's called an imaginary audience. And teenagers often think they're invincible. Like, I'll speed in my car because a crash won't happen to me. I'm special. I'm good at driving. Maybe it'll happen to someone else. So both antisocial and narcissistic traits and behaviors are initially adaptive and developmentally appropriate. Both can be traits or behaviors that are not pathological, but both can go awry in adulthood and lead to some really disturbing personality profiles.
Yes, which leads us to the DSM. The DSM criteria for both antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders are not really super helpful. The criteria doesn't have any overt overlap, though some is inferred.
Yeah. So like if you lack remorse, like in antisocial, do you lack empathy too, as in narcissistic?
Exactly. Or like the deceitfulness in antisocial and exploitativeness in narcissism, they can go together. I think antisocial seems to take the more severe behavior of the narcissistic personality in the DSM.
Yeah, which would make sense if it overlaps more with the malignant flavor of narcissism. It's going to be worse by nature of the beast.
Right. Now, the DSM specifically says antisocial and narcissistic share traits like being tough-minded, glib, superficial, exploitative, and unempathetic. However, antisocials are more impulsive, aggressive, deceitful, and indifferent, with a history of conduct disorder and possible adult criminality.
Okay.
Whereas narcissists are more envious. They need more admiration from others. They're more sensitive to others' criticisms and reactions, and they usually don't have conduct disorder or adult criminality.
Yeah, so the DSM tells us some significant differences, but unsurprisingly, it does so mostly along the lines of criminality. But I do agree with what the DSM says about narcissists needing more admiration, even if it's subtle, because narcissists in all flavors live off the applause of others, and antisocials don't even understand why you're clapping in the first place.
That's so true, though. Yeah. So the DSM's antisocial overemphasizes the criminal behavior. Many antisocials aren't criminal, or maybe they just never get caught.
True.
And historically, there's been two types of antisocial personalities, the passive parasitic, so that's the nonviolent con artist type, and then the aggressive, which is the violent type.
Yeah.
Now, I would say aggressive isn't really common for narcissists, but they may be the passive parasitic types if they have the malignant narcissism.
Yes, this is so interesting. Aggression then taints the narcissist image, so they would be more likely to engage in conning or scheming due to their entitlement. It's kind of behind the scenes manipulation. But regardless, neither DSM definition is great. Narcissistic personality disorder really, in the DSM, only focuses on the grandiose version of narcissism, but it's way, way more complex than that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And speaking of the nuances of narcissism, I love how Stone places narcissism on a spectrum of dark personalities. So we can find narcissism and antisocial dynamics in the middle of Michael Stone, he's a forensic researcher, his negative personality spectrum. So in order of severity, he lists severe narcissistic personality disorder, then malignant narcissism, and then antisocial personality disorder.
Yes, and just defining malignant narcissism for a sec, this was originally coined by Kernberg, who noted that this is narcissism with impaired morality. So here is where there's an overlap between narcissism and antisocial, and there are 4 parts to malignant narcissism. So there's the narcissistic core, there's antisocial behavior, there's paranoid suspiciousness, and then there's aggression or sadism.
Yes. And according to Stone, all of this is preceding psychopathy. So in other words, he views psychopathy as worse than narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism, and antisocial.
Yeah, which this makes me want to reference Robert Hare's understanding of psychopathy here, because I think they go together. So his psychopathy checklist revised includes 2 factors. One that is associated with narcissism and one that is associated with overt antisocial behavior. So to me, this demonstrates both their separateness, but also their potential overlap in the same person with psychopathy.
Yes. And I would argue that the malignant narcissism in a psychopath could look like a superficial, charming, selfish person, maybe, who would take the life savings of an old lady if the opportunity presented itself.
Like she left her checkbook at his house or something.
Yeah, because they feel like they're entitled to it,
Yeah.
Versus the antisocial behavior of a psychopath might look like premeditated manipulation and revenge to take the money of the old lady because they deserve retribution for that one time she mistreated them in some way.
Yeah, like maybe she's the neighbor of an antisocial and she got after the antisocial because they didn't pick up after their dog poop in her yard.
You're right. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So narcissism is a passive entitlement. Like the world needs to hand me this stuff because I deserve it. Like I'm special. Versus the antisocial behavior has more energy behind it. Not only are they entitled, but there's retribution for them not having what you have. It's unfair. So they'll grab it out of your hands. But narcissism isn't both. It's really hard to put into words because there is so much overlap between the two.
Exactly. That is such a great point. And this transitions us right into Millon's theory on the differences and similarities between antisocial and narcissistic, which I personally find the most helpful.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right. So Millon notes that antisocials and narcissists overlap. So they're both independent with that self-focus and self-orientation. So they turn to the self to fulfill their needs, to find gratification. And they only rely on themselves for safety, for self-esteem. They find weakness and dependency threatening and fear any loss of self-determination. So they're both exploitative, unempathetic. They value prestige and power, and that leads to a pursuit of status and superiority. So they want to be more important or wealthy or strong or beautiful, etc. And they devalue others' opinions and standards in this process.
So you'll find both types in positions of power where they preside over others, like politics, business, Wall Street, the usual. And they are very self-reliant. Yeah.
They are. Now, antisocials differ. So they likely had a harsh upbringing with deprivation, psychological undernourishment, and an absence of love. And this led to rage and hatred towards specific people in childhood. But then it's usually generalized later to basically all of society.
Yeah. Others have typically mistreated, undervalued, exploited, and humiliated them because antisocial childhoods often do have significant abuse. So they only trust themselves and they anticipate that others are going to be hostile, deceptive, malicious. So they counter this with their own power, using self-determination to protect and to compensate. Basically, if they have the power and then they take the power from others, no one can exploit them.
Yeah, they learn they can only rely on themselves and take what they feel like they are owed. There's not a passive sense of entitlement, but an active exploitativeness, being overtly antagonistic, aggressive and angry, and they take the power, they take the materials from others. So their exploitative egocentricity is not passive. It's a contract breaking, two-faced means to an end, actively planned thing.
Yes, that is a great point. Yeah, they don't trust others. So they have to actively pursue independence and prove themselves, as well as advocate for their rights and even be ruthless or harsh as needed to obtain that power or to retaliate. They are actively motivated to make themselves bigger and better and more powerful to obtain superiority and to try to fill that inner void, but they can't fill it. They always feel empty and have, according to Millon, a powerful hunger for the love and recognition they did not receive in early life.
Yes. So simply, antisocials usually have an active manipulation, history of childhood, conduct disorder, and adult criminality that narcissists lack.
Yeah. So narcissists differ in that they are passively independent, meaning that they just automatically, blindly, and benignly assume that they're just better than you. They're superior. They're snobby, arrogant, self-centered, with irrational self-confidence. But their self-centeredness doesn't stem from distrust like the antisocials does. They're just existing without effort. And that justifies their entitlement to security, others' favor, all the good things, etc.
Yeah, and this means they passively exploit others due to their egocentricity, indirectly or gently seducing so others see them as like deserving and special. They just simply expect others will freely give them all that they need and want. Like they're just genuinely entitled. And again, it is passive. It's a benign sense of entitlement, which is unlike the antisocial who actively exploits to take something. And this is also they can fill their inner void and feel satisfaction, which usually antisocials can't feel. So they assume all that they wish for will just come to them despite a lack of effort on their part.
Exactly. Yeah, there's already a parasitic feel to that. Like, I don't need to do anything except to just be needy. But they would never say that, right? Due to their incessant demand for narcissistic supply, though, through entitlement.
And other people are obviously the difficult ones, the sources of all their troubles, like the ones responsible for any failures, which means obviously other people should make it up to them and attend to all of the narcissistic's needs and wishes, you know, since other people are the inferior ones.
Exactly. Yeah. But then with their superiority, intrinsic specialness, and belief that they are owed all the good things in life, then results actually in a lack of goal-oriented behaviors as well as being stagnant in life. But they're never going to admit this. And if so, it's everyone else's fault.
Right. Like, so they don't feel like they have to prove themselves. They don't put in that active effort, but antisocials do.
Yeah.
And this actually makes sense with one path of conditions that can lead to a narcissistic personality structure involving overindulgence, parental over-evaluation, and essentially early spoiling that basically sets the standards for love so high, like unrealistically high, so that it will never be satisfied.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a few different pathways to narcissistic personality disorder, but one is overindulgence, which is really the opposite of the antisocial's upbringing as abusive. Not to say that those with narcissistic personality didn't have toxic upbringing, but anyway, I do think we need to talk about Millon subtypes here because there is some overlap with antisocial and narcissistic personalities in his subtypes.
Yes. Okay. If we will remember, antisocial overlaps most with narcissistic and sadistic. Then narcissistic overlaps most with antisocial and histrionic. So Millon has a few subtypes that showcase this. So the first that we're going to talk about is the reputation defending devious. This is an antisocial personality core, and it has narcissistic and sadistic features. So they want status and reputation for the purpose of power, because if they have power, then they avoid being harmed by others and they obtained what they were deprived of in early life. So the narcissistic part is, of course, the status and reputation, but the motive of wanting it for power instead of image is what makes it antisocial.
Yeah.
They just take it, right? They actively take it. They don't just passively feel like they're owed it.
Yeah. They aren't necessarily defending their ego like a narcissist would, but it's their power, which is what their reputation represents to them.
Yes. Then we have the exploitative egoist. So this is a narcissistic personality with antisocial and histrionic features. So in their superiority pursuit, they attempt to gain the self-worth by seducing others in games of sexual exploits, which is histrionic flavors. But it only lasts like a day to a few weeks because it's a very shallow intimacy. They're very clever in their deception. They act without conscience because, you know, they're above everything. Yeah, their confidence is fake. And they don't actually engage in effort to prove their worth or their attractiveness or their skill. Essentially, they just can't put their money where their mouth is. But they fear being exposed because of their underlying inadequacy.
So because this is a narcissistic subtype, they keep pursuing ego cookies and are never fully satisfied. It reminds me of the lack of fulfillment that we mentioned earlier with narcissists. Like there's an emptiness that comes from that voracious ego appetite. They're never satisfied or satiated, and it's everyone else's fault.
And then lastly, we have the unprincipled narcissist. So that's a narcissistic personality with antisocial features. So on the outside, there's maybe a shallow shell of polite charm and civility, but also attempts to present as tough and fearless and strong and intimidating. So this personality is arrogant with a weak superego, which is the antisocial, amoral, lacking conscious aspect. And they don't have any sense of loyalty. So they can be found in rehabs or maybe They're incarcerated, but mostly they're successful individuals keeping just within the bounds. They enjoy the game of exploiting, outwitting, and obtaining power before all of that is done to them.
Ooh, so they direct maliciousness towards others, finding satisfaction in dominating and humiliating others. But then they have interpersonal and legal difficulties. Shocker, right? Relationships are used only to gain something. And if that stops, they'll drop that relationship like a hot potato and not look back, thinking like, you're no use to me now. But they expect to be treated with specialness while still maintaining that core of like narcissistic passive entitlement.
So to summarize, antisocials are active, narcissists are passive, and their overlap can include flavors of both as evidenced by their subtypes. But let's talk about our thoughts. So I think the main difficulty with narcissistic personalities and antisocial personalities is that they are both interpreted as narcissistic because they're self-focused. And to be fair, narcissism is a term that is overused now in general, but to have an orientation to the self will elicit others to view one as a narcissist.
Absolutely. Yeah. Both have a strong whiff of Narci. The self-focus is very evident. As with most personality disorders, narcissism is typically that first whiff that you get that something's off. But beyond that gets tricky because you have to look at what's driving the behavior.
You do. And antisocials are more misunderstood. And I think this is where the traumatic neglect, abuse, and that unloved aspect of childhood comes in. So antisocials have a higher threshold for pain compared to narcissists. And antisocials learned at a very young age to hide their vulnerable, squishy part of them.
Yeah. And I believe narcissists, according to some research, they are average in their relationship to pain. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Millon, that's what Millon's theory says. Also, narcissists care because they need others to be above. And they compare themselves in the social hierarchy. And antisocials just don't give a flying hoot about the social hierarchy to begin with.
No, they don't. No, they don't. They flip it on its head. Yeah, because narcissists need the social herd for narcissistic supply because they need their place in the hierarchy to be number one, right? There's a subtle dependency there. Like narcissists need applause of others and ego cookies versus antisocials take matters into their own hands. Like basically the passive versus active approach that Millon pointed out. Yeah. And I also think about empathy and the differences with these two types. So narcissists are often deficient in empathy. And I like to think of them as having like cognitive empathy or intermittent empathy. It can turn on sometimes when it's convenient for them in a cognitive type of way. So they need to have some type of understanding of empathy to blend in to get the ego cookies.
Whereas antisocials, I like to think of them as having blinders on. So they just simply don't even see the need for empathy.
Yeah.
So unless you like physically turn their heads to point it out, maybe then they can have a cognitive understanding of it. But whether or not they actually feel it is another thing.
Yeah, very much. That's a great point. I also think of like students and like the approach to school in these types. So this isn't a perfect one-for-one analysis, but narcissists can make good students. Like they're motivated to look good, to make the grade. They probably subconsciously feel entitled to it, but even still, like they can follow the rules to get the ego cookies.
Right, but also they obviously deserve the A. So they can sometimes produce inadequate work and then still feel entitled to the grade, or not put in enough effort and still feel entitled to the grade, or heaven forbid there's a group project.
Oh, for sure. Or on the flip side, a narcissist can be so concerned about their image that they do the whole group project themselves to control the grade and the outcome. And this would be where there's potentially some obsessive compulsive personality flavors there.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
Versus an antisocial, especially disorder level, is more interested in skipping school since it represents a social construct and they reject it. Like, you can't label me with grades. Psh, I just won't show up.
Totally. Like school is just a government attempting to ingrain conformity on the masses. They are not going to be a part of that. like sit at a desk for hours. Nope. They will challenge and attempt to gain some control however they deem necessary.
Absolutely. Very much so. Yeah. Antisocials can be more angsty versus narcissists can sometimes be more infantile with tantrums for ego cookies.
I agree with that. Okay. And in the presence of an antisocial, I feel the dominance and power in a way that makes the air thicker. Like you want to make sure you're standing up straight.
They're alpha. Yeah.
But then in the presence of a narcissist, I think their energy feels more like a flimsy entitlement to the space in the room, laced with some insecurity, usually accompanied by posturing. Personally, it makes me feel annoyed, not vigilant.
Yeah.
I am a schizoid, so narcissistic dynamics don't feel as threatening to me. So I just do want to state narcissists absolutely can be abusive.
Absolutely, they can be. Yeah. Yeah. I also have a different reaction to them. Like I feel irritated and bored with a narcissist versus an antisocial. I feel a polarization inside myself. I either feel the need to match their energy or to hide from it, which is interesting. Yeah. Definitely. But it is a tricky thing to distinguish between the two, especially when it's not at disorder level. And I think back to what we were saying earlier about the upbringing too. Like, was it a very, very traumatic, abusive upbringing where the child didn't feel loved versus like the overindulgence path? Like those are very different upbringings where there's enmeshment versus rejection. Last thing I'll say about that is narcissists in adulthood aren't necessarily going to lead a revolution against society. Like narcissists won't because it's too risky. They need the social herd for ego cookies, and therefore they need to blend in. But the antisocial will absolutely take charge and start a revolution. Like, screw ego cookies. I make my own.
Oh my goodness. I like that. I like that. So for antisocials, it's screw ego cookies. I make my own.
Absolutely. That's, if we had to boil it down to one thing to distinguish the two, that's it. The need for ego cookies versus screw it, I make my own.
Yeah. Mama, give me the ego cookies.
Oh my goodness. All right. So today we looked at antisocial versus narcissistic personality. We presented some of the evidence, but what do you think? Are they the same? Are they different? Did we miss anything? I'll put a poll out on YouTube where you can submit your answers. We love hearing from you. We do have an episode on antisocial and schizoid coming out next. So don't forget to like, subscribe, give us a shout out. If you're a personality nerd like us, we've also got blogs, visuals, and references that coincide with each episode at www.personalitycouch.com. And if you're a provider looking to consult about a case, or if you're in need of psychodynamic therapy or a deep dive psychological evaluation, we can help with that. I'll provide a link in the show notes. Be well, be kind. We'll see you next time on The Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.